we can really conquer this problem. And it comes down to just trying to understand all the different layers.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and for you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
My name is Clancy Harrison. I'm a registered dietitian, a hunger fighter. I run a food pantry, a very large food pantry in northeastern Pennsylvania. For over 10 years, I've been the president. And during that time, I also started a nonprofit called the Food Dignity Project, which is now called the Movement. And so hopefully we can talk a little bit more about all of that stuff. But personally, I have 2 children, a dog and a husband. So I'm a very busy person.
I'm in my 90th year. I turned 89. I finished 89 years a few days ago. And I've been in the food business most of my life. I spent 40 years as a mechanical engineer, but I applied that to some of that to the food business. I've never been hungry in my life, so I guess that's pretty hard to understand why people are hungry and what they want.
Well, Henry, first, I just want to say we have 2 things in common. I've been in the food industry for all of my professional career. I'm 25 years into that, and I've never experienced hunger either. And so I think it's very unique that we're both coming from a lens of never experiencing hunger, but yet we're talking about it. And I think that's a really important point that any listeners understand, because we're coming from that lens, and I think that's important.
Well, I don't know much about hunger, as I said, but I do know that I was involved in the baking industry, and the saying is bread is basic has been throughout the years. Supposedly the manna that came down from heaven was like bread, and we're not too sure. My family's been in bakeries for over 400 years, so we've provided food for people over the years. That's.
When you say provided food for people over the years, were you providing it to help fight hunger?
Well, some years ago, back in the Great Depression in the United States, the government there was a lot of hunger and a lot of famine. People were getting rickets and all kinds of diseases. And so the government tried to find out what they could do to alleviate that. Now, this is in the United States. But they came up with the fact that almost everybody in the United States ate white bread. So to this day, from that time on, white bread is deemed to be a very important item in your diet. And the food industry or the bakeries are required to add vitamins to the white bread. And that was to help the hunger. They had bread lines. My grandfather owned a very large bakery at that time, and the bread that was left over or taken back was put out, and people would come and help themselves.
That's wonderful, Henry. And you know what I really what resonated to me was the fortification. You're talking about fortifying bread to make it more healthy for people, because if we're just eating flour that's not fortified with that fiber and the iron and the other B vitamins, we could be malnourished. And you're talking about a time where that was really important because we were going off to war, men were being recruited. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a product of that generation, but I'm just curious, during that time, food stamps and the national school lunch programs were being launched. Do you have any memories of how these food assistance programs, which I would love to, after you share your view, I'll share my view of my experience in working with them, but do you have any memories of the launch and how they've changed those programs when you were probably a very young boy at that time, right? Because food stamps was launched in the 1930s, and I think school lunch was launched in the 1940s, sometime around that. But do you have any memories of those programs and how they were received by the general population? What was your experience with that?
That's kind of hard to say because I grew up during World War II. I was 6 years old in 1938, and I can remember my mother saying that this is the first day of World War when Hitler invaded Poland. So I can't remember anybody at all being hungry at that time. We were raised in a farming area community, and there was always lots of food. But I do hear stories, and I did hear lots of stories about breadlines in the 30s and the food, and how there were certain gardens that were fostered by various organizations, even back in those days, where they raised vegetables and gave them away. The theme at that time was to work for your living, which is kind of different from today. But most everybody either went to WPA or they went to there was the camps that were, CCC camps. And they provided food, and they provided bedding and all kinds of different things for people that were down and out and were hungry, but you had to work to get it.
Can you explain more? First of all, what is WBA? Those are, when you say camps, like for children, for family, what were those?
The WPA was a work program designed for people who couldn't find jobs and who couldn't work, and they were given government money to do work. I know several items were done. My grandfather, who was very well off at that time, hired WPA to do work on his farm. They did a lot of work. And the CCC camps were people who would just sign up, sort of like I can't think of the name now. It's sort of, anyhow, you went to these camps and they did conservation work. It was a conservation corps. And that was another government-sponsored thing. And so that was another way to get bread and food for your families.
So the government would provide working opportunities. In response, they would get food. Would they also make money?
Well, mostly, I believe in WPA you got a stipend, but in CCC, no, you were just taken care of, if I can remember right. Some of that stuff, has been so long ago, almost 100 years ago. So,
yeah. Well, I think it's really important to talk about, because then I can share also my experience. I fight hunger, and we're doing this for World Food Bank. So I've ran a food pantry, and it is a place where we give out food. Most of it comes, the food pantry, I guess maybe I should back up. A food bank is a place that's going to house food, just like a bank would with your money. And then a food pantry is a place where people can come and get groceries. And we receive that food from the food bank. People are not allowed to eat at our food pantry. However, soup kitchen, people can come and sit down and eat a meal, but they don't leave with food. So there is a difference. Sometimes people will say food bank and food pantries, and you use them interchangeably when they're two different things. So I've ran a food pantry for over 10 years, and it is a place where people will come, they will pre-register. There are some government forms that they have to fill out to verify their income to see if they're eligible. And they do receive a 4-day supply of food for our food pantry. And I guess what you said, that your experience was that people would work in exchange. Now, I have to say, at our food pantry, we do have a lot of our volunteers who are working. So they're working at the food pantry to help provide, and then they're taking food as well. And something was also resonated with me in what you're talking about. We have something called Career Links. And Career Links is a place where people have job placement to get job skills, and they come to our food pantry. Career Links will pay them to get that experience where they're pretty much volunteering at our food pantry, and they also get to receive food. So some of that still does happen, and I just wanted to point that out. But my work with COVID in particularly, we went from 150 people served at our distribution per day to over 2,000 people. So COVID really did have an impact when people started to lose their jobs, or maybe they couldn't work because of the pandemic. And it's been a hard year and a half, to say the least, I think, for many people. And living through that pandemic and watching hunger become more of the spotlight. Every time you turned on the news, you would see all types of stories with Feeding America, which is our national food banking system in the United States. And you would see big food banks in Houston and New York. While my town is a little small town, we would still have lines of cars for waiting for 2 hours to receive the food. So, when we talk about what the state of hunger is in the United States today, it's constantly changing. I can't even really give you any numbers. If you were to look at Feeding America's website right now, they would say 40 million people are food insecure or experiencing chronic hunger. However, that number is constantly changing. I have to look at that website every time before I speak, because I know it's going to change. And it changes because maybe there's different government programs out there, whether it is some type of food assistance programs or something helping with unemployment. So that's constantly changing. And I'm just curious, did you experience, or do you remember any stories about, do you remember the school lunch program? And when that launched, it was like in the 1946. I remember one of the things that was really important for that time was that we were sending men off to war, but they were malnourished. And the president at that time started the school lunch program. And I would love, to hear a little bit more of your experience that was around you. So again, remember, we said that neither of us experienced hunger, and we're coming from that lens. But do you remember any stories about the school lunch program and how that was taking place in in the time that you were growing up?
Yeah, I was raised in a small community of several hundred people, but when I was in school, we had a total in 12 grades of about maybe 600 people. It was largely a farming community, and we had what we called the muck farms. They're black earth, and that's where they raised celery and lettuce and stuff. And we had a lot of families that were first generation and second generation Americans who were working in those areas, and it wasn't a very high paying, profitable thing at that time. Those children, when they came to school, got free lunches. Now, I can remember paying a nickel for lunch, and then it went up to a dime, and everybody was really upset. But the free lunches came for the people who couldn't make enough money or tried hard and couldn't make enough money. Another program I think is great. I don't know if they do it here, but in Florida they started. The supermarkets all got together, and the stuff that was out of date, they allowed somebody to come in and take it. Now, I think there's a program in Akron that's run like that too.
Yeah, there's a lot of food recovery. So you raised a really good point about not understanding how anyone could be hungry. And maybe this is a good time to talk about definitions of food insecurity and what they mean. Our government has 4 different definitions of food insecurity. We have food security, which basically means anyone in the household, the entire household, has enough food to live a healthy and active lifestyle. Then the next category is marginal food security. And that means that people might start stressing about food access. So they have enough food, but there's a fear I'm going to run out. Maybe a bill came in and maybe their car broke down and they have a new bill, and suddenly like, oh my goodness, I have to pay this. What's going to happen? Am I going to run out of food? So there's a stress level. They have enough to eat, but there's stress. Both food secure and marginal food secure are considered people who are not hungry. Now we have 2 other definitions, and it's low food security and very low food security. And I think this is where I had a lot of misunderstandings and started doing all the work that I'm doing in this world of food insecurity. And so when we say low food security, what happens here is, again, now both of these definitions, I should back up. Both of these definitions are considered people who experience hunger. So low food security is going to happen when someone's just buying bread. They might be buying white bread, and that's all they're eating. They're eating instant noodles day in and day out. They're getting enough to fill their belly, but they might be missing the protein, the calcium, the vitamin D, all of these other nutrients that we need to thrive. So they could actually be overweight or live in a larger body, but still be malnourished on the inside. That is actually hunger in the United States, but it's a definition of hunger that we don't really acknowledge in the definition. If we think from lay terms and we're talking to the general population, I've been speaking on this with healthcare professionals for over 7 years now. And many people assume that hunger is starvation, it's famine. So we are that, and so that would be very low food security. And in this category, someone might skip a meal, they might skip 3 meals, they might not eat at all. So that's where we start seeing that real hunger. We have hunger pains, we're missing our meals. And I'm a product of the 70s and 80s. So I grew up watching a lot of PSAs on TV, save the third world countries, the starving children in Africa. So even my view as a dietitian, when I started doing my work, was hunger was famine. It was that little kid eating off the ground with bugs flying around his face and his bloated belly and his skinny arms and his sunken, like the eyes are all sunken. So that was my visualization. And once I started doing the work and really trying to figure out where my misconceptions came from and what is the true definitions and what do they really mean, I started opening my eyes. And then I had to dive in, well, because I agree with you, Henry, like, especially in the United States, how could we live in a country where we have so much food being produced, so much food being wasted in the United States, but we still have hunger? And another thing that's attached to it is that many people don't reach out for the help that they need because they're ashamed. There's a stigma around that. Maybe they don't know that they qualify for the food assistance programs. Maybe they don't have transportation to get back and forth. There's a lot of barriers that is surrounding that. And so there's so many nuances that go into what food insecurity is in the United States today. And so I really appreciate you, Henry, in sharing your concerns and trying to figure out, well, how does this even exist today? And what does it mean? And I think it's something that having this conversation with you will help us both understand even more together and anyone else that's listening. So I thank you for that.
It seems like that many of the third world countries in Africa and some of these in Central America, South America is pretty well developed, but it's Central America where food is hard to come by because it's generally raised locally. They live in remote areas where food is hard. Good food is hard to get to. As I said, I've been involved with bread all my life. I believe in bread because bread, you talk about protein.
Delicious.
Well, even the slightest of white bread is around 8 to 9% protein. And the flour is, I'm sorry, but not the loaf, but there are proteins and acids and stuff involved in bread that can maintain life for a long time. There's many, just about every place I've been in the world, and I've been around a lot of different places. They all eat bread, they all do the same thing. And like you said, though, you can fill your belly full of bread and it isn't going to give you the vitamins and minerals you need. I don't know if most people don't realize that in 1968, Russia's wheat crop completely failed. They had no wheat at all. And the United States from the 30s on had kept a year's reserve. We stored our wheat for a year and then milled it and sold it. That became a staple in the bakeries because certain acids and certain enzymes were developed in that wheat during that storage period. In 1968, we sent all of our extra wheat, every bit of it, to Russia because there was no wheat over there at all. People were absolutely hungry. Wheat is basic in a lot of foods, not just bread. That changed our baking industry overnight because those enzymes and acids weren't in the bread, and that made a big difference in the quality of the bread and stuff. And that's when I started to travel around the world to help reestablish good bread development and stuff. That's my experience anyhow. So if that helps you, if that's what you're looking for, I can tell you that's what this country does for others.
I love that. You just gave me the chills. I think that's beautiful that you were able to do that and have that experience and also to share it with everyone here.
Yeah, well, I worked as a consultant for many years as a bakery consultant after I gave up my own bakery. And it was very rewarding. I guess I've worked in just about every state in a lot of different countries, but you see a lot of difference around the country as to the quality of life and how people live.
I wish I lived in your state because I would love to come and learn how to bake bread with you. I think you should be teaching young kids so that we don't lose it. It's become so industrialized and you have an art. So I'm really curious about, we come from two different generations. We have different experiences with hunger in the food world. How can we come together and move forward, do you feel, to fight hunger? What do you think we need to do?
Well, my thought is to work through the churches to fight hunger. The churches do more to fight hunger than any other entity in the world, I believe.
But in my view and my experience of how, if we're going to come together and fight hunger, I think it starts with understanding the definition of hunger too many times I've seen when I, as a speaker, that people don't really even understand what hunger is. And so I think we need more education around it. And I also think that we need to educate our future leaders. And when I say leader, I don't necessarily mean a government leader or a church leader. They're included in that. But I'm talking about healthcare professionals, people who run businesses, people who run nonprofits. They need to understand that the basic need of food is going to help improve their bottom line at the end of the day. So, because we know when someone is food insecure or nutrient insecure, meaning they don't have the nutrients to live a healthy and active lifestyle, there's going to be chronic disease. There's going to be obesity. So people living in larger bodies, we have high blood pressure, cholesterol, cancer. There's 10 chronic diseases associated with food insecurity. And I think that if we can train our future leaders that the basic need of food is going to help improve their outcomes, whether they're a nonprofit or corporate leader, I think we could have better conversations and better understanding, and then we can start to normalize the programs that are out there. Maybe we have to take a deeper dive into what causes food insecurity, because food insecurity is really a symptom of poverty. And so what does that mean? How do we get people out into the workforce and getting paid appropriately for what they're doing? So there's so many, like I said before, there's so many nuances that go into it that I think we literally need to break it down to what does food insecurity actually mean? And then how does that impact us? Even if you've never experienced hunger like me, but maybe I could do a better job just trying to understand it so I can relate more with my clients when I talk as a dietitian about food access. So I agree. There's a place definitely for the faith-based organizations. There's a place for government. But one place that we've been missing a lot is corporations and business leaders, and what's their fiscal responsibility when they have a workforce that might not be getting paid what they should be. They're struggling to get food on their table. If they can't get food on their table, their kid might be sick more often. They might be missing work because their kid's sick or they're sick. There's low productivity at work, all these other things, and high utilization rates with healthcare. All of this costs companies, but they don't see that connection. So I think educating, a lot of education, and I have to say, I don't know at all. I always say I'm not an expert in food insecurity because I didn't live with hunger. I'm only an expert in what I'm learning. And every day that I walk into that food pantry and that food bank, I say, what can I learn today? Where's the lesson? And how can I change so we can really conquer this problem? And it comes down to just trying to understand all the different layers. So I think one thing that we have to really maybe pay attention to is food stamps is not called food stamps anymore. It's called SNAP. So that's really important to understand. It's the largest food assistance program in the nation. For every dollar that's invested into SNAP, $1.80 goes back into the economy, the retail economy. Then we have Women, Infant, and Children. That's WIC. That's another program to help mothers, even grandparents who might be watching. Maybe they're the caregiver of their grandchild. So that could be something that people could use. It's usually kids 5 and under that it supports. School lunch programs, really important. I would say those are our top 3. In the summer, we have school meal programs, In the summer, we have summer feeding programs. They're usually at your parks or your local libraries where any child under the age of 18 can walk and get a free meal. That's often underutilized because people don't know about it. And then the last thing I would say is certainly go to the Feeding America website, look up your local food bank, and find out those grassroots efforts that are in your town that could be right down the street and you had no idea, like I said before, with the Dinner with Kids program.
One of the things I was thinking about while you were talking was that those programs are all fine, but it's my firm belief that those programs should not be run by the government. They should be supported by the government, but not run by the government. They need to be run by people who are very interested in what they're doing, such as yourself, because so many of as I said before, so many of these programs go by the whims of the government, and somebody will sit up there and say, well, I don't like broccoli, so I don't think we should have broccoli on this program. I think it needs to be run by dietitians and people as yourself who know what they're doing. There should be an outline. The government should support it, but not do it. To me, that's very important.
Yeah, and I just want to point out many of those people that actually that work in those programs. So maybe it's a WIC educator, maybe it's a SNAP Ed educator. They're food insecure themselves. And that's they're underpaid, they're overworked, they're stressed. And I've spoken to this population many times, and I've had people stand up in the audience and they're like, sometimes the people coming in to see us have more benefits than we're even getting paid to work with these people. So I think that there's a lot of issues within that from that level. So I appreciate that.
One of the other aspects that we don't put enough emphasis on is education. I spent some time living in Florida in a city where there's a large Spanish-speaking community, where the people came from Mexico and from Honduras and places like that, and they weren't educated and couldn't get good jobs. Education is a very important part of that. If we educate those people, they'll get better jobs and they can provide.
Yep, I agree. Education's key. So, Henry, I have a question for you. I recently interviewed a fellow dietitian, and she found her great grandmother's ration cards from World War I. And the thing that Ellie really wanted to talk about on the podcast was how we approached hunger back in that day. And it was from a very patriotic it was from a very patriotic standpoint. So we're going to fight the war. We're going to end hunger because we have to fight the war. We're going to come together. And I thought that was very powerful and very different than if we look at how hunger is today. There's a lot of, I would say, shame and stigma. There's a lot of misconceptions. There's some judgment around it. But when she said that, when they were coming from that lens that we have to come together and unite, I thought that was pretty powerful. And I'm just curious if you have any, I know this is way before your time, but I'm just curious if you have any insight on that.
No, I think it was probably a good program at that time. During World War II, we had meat rationing, sugar rationing, and other items that were short. And we didn't have, I can't remember a rationing card, but we had points. And they were like coins. They were red and blue and green and different colors. And you were issued so many points a month. So you could buy so much steak, you could buy so much sugar, you could buy so much shortening, sugar shortening. But in the bakery, we were allowed to buy anything we needed to produce, but the individuals had to go by points. I forgot all about that. So I think that was an effort in the government to control. And by giving people points, they were pretty much ensured if you got red points, you're going to use that for meat. If you got blue points, you're going to use that for shortening. And I think that was an effort also to keep up and my mother, who was in a wheelchair at the time, actually used to teach people to operate victory gardens. They took unused land and plowed it and fitted it and plotted it off. And they had people come from in the cities out and operate these gardens. They were called victory gardens. And that you're raising your own food. I forgot about that kind of stuff.
So why were they called victory gardens?
Well, because we were going to beat the Nazis, and But that was one way to combat, well, it saved in distribution, it saved in a lot of different ways, but it provided an opportunity for people to get out and grow their own food and get more if they couldn't subsist on the points that the government gave them. That's about the gist of the whole thing.
So I love that, because not only what Ellie taught me from the podcast from World War I, it was also extended to World War II. And I think with us coming together from a patriotism, if we can come together through patriotism, and we're going to make our country stronger, and we're a community that comes together because food nourishes us. And if we're nourished, then our nation's nourished, and we have a good economy. We have strong men and women who can go overseas and fight for us. I look at it also as a national crisis from a standpoint of security and having strong people around us. So I think your generation, I wish we could bring that back to where we are today in fighting hunger and make it more as a community, because we're going to be victorious, whether we're fighting the Nazis or whether we're fighting a pandemic. We can be victorious if we can reach in and help each other.
Clancy, if you ever get a chance to come to Vitalia Montrose, I'll teach you how to bake bread. It's
I don't know where that is. What state is that in?
It's in Ohio.
Well, I don't know. I'm in Pennsylvania. I don't
know. We're just west of Akron.
Oh, I used to live in Rocky River.
Well, it's not very far from Rocky River, but if you ever do get around here, we'll take you upstairs in the kitchen and I'll teach you how to make basic bread: flour, water, sugar, yeast, nothing else.
I'm going to hold you to it. Thank you, Henry.
Come see me.
So if anyone's listening and you want to learn more about the work that I'm doing, you could just go to the fooddignitymovement.org and you'll be able to find our podcast. You'll be able to find our you'll be able to find our contact link and also a donation if you want to donate to our nonprofit.
I'd love to bake bread for your program.
Oh.
And I think to myself,